You are in violation of Set 3. This is an abomination!
It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning in Willow Creek, a suburban neighborhood famous for its manicured lawns, pastel houses, and the suffocating grip of its homeowners association. Parents chatted on porches, sprinklers ticked across perfect green lawns, and children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. But behind the facade of calm, resentment was brewing, resentment that would soon explode into violence. At the center of it all was Karen Whitfield, a 52-year-old self-appointed guardian of the HOA. She had a reputation. Some neighbors called her the rulebook queen. Others whispered less flattering titles, HOA Karen, neighborhood watchdog, or simply, the enforcer. She thrived on pointing out violations: a trash bin left out too long, a car parked slightly crooked, a mailbox painted the wrong shade of beige. But nothing enraged her quite like the treehouse. Just 2 houses down from Karen's picture-perfect yard, 8-year-old Ethan Miller and his dad, Ryan, had spent weeks building a modest wooden treehouse. To Ethan, it was a castle in the sky, a fortress of dreams. To Ryan, it was a weekend project to bond with his son. To Karen, it was an eyesore, a violation of HOA Rule 14.3, no unapproved structures may be erected in front yards or visible areas. Karen had already sent 3 official complaints. The HOA board had not acted quickly, since most neighbors felt the treehouse was harmless. But Karen's frustration grew into obsession. She glared at the structure every morning as if it were a personal insult. Last week, Ethan invited 2 friends over. They climbed into the treehouse laughing, tossing down a rope ladder, their giggles echoing down the street. Ryan sat nearby, sipping coffee, proud of what he and his boy had created. That's when Karen stormed across her driveway, HOA binder clutched to her chest like a weapon. "You're in violation," she shouted, pointing a finger at Ryan. "This monstrosity is unsafe, unapproved, and ruining our property values. Tear it down, or I will." Ryan tried to reason with her. "Karen, it's just a treehouse for kids. They're safe. Look, I even reinforced the base with steel brackets." But Karen wasn't listening. She pulled out her phone and began snapping pictures. "The board will fine you $1,000. And if they don't act, I will." The neighbors started peeking out from windows. Some rolled their eyes. Everyone knew Karen's reputation. But no one expected what would come next. 2 days later, in the dead of night, Karen crept across the lawn with a battery-powered saw hidden beneath her oversized cardigan. She pressed her lips tight, her eyes burning with fury. The beam of her flashlight swept across the treehouse, illuminating the wooden ladder. She didn't care that children had built memories here. She didn't care that Ethan had painted his name on the side in wobbly blue letters. All she cared about was her vision of order, her sacred HOA rules. The saw roared to life. Within minutes, the treehouse's base beam buckled. The wood cracked like thunder. The entire structure lurched to one side. And then, chaos. Ethan had been inside, asleep in a sleeping bag after convincing his dad to let him camp in his treehouse for the night. His terrified scream tore through the stillness as the structure gave way. The treehouse collapsed halfway, with splintering, Ethan tumbling down onto the yard below. Ryan bolted outside barefoot, his heart slamming against his chest. He found his son crying, blood streaming from a gash on his arm. And standing there, saw still in hand, was Karen. The neighborhood erupted. Porch lights flicked on. Doors swung open. People gathered, some shouting, others calling 911. The sound of sirens grew closer as deputies rushed into Willow Creek. For the first time, Karen looked unsure, her bravado slipping into panic. But it was too late. She had crossed a line no HOA rule could ever justify. That night would mark the beginning of a battle that shook Willow Creek to its core, a battle of neighbors, power, and justice. And it all started with one treehouse. Willow Creek wasn't just another suburban neighborhood, it was a carefully engineered illusion. From the outside, it looked like a dream, winding streets lined with trimmed hedges, freshly painted homes, and neighbors who waved politely as they drove by in spotless SUVs. But beneath the polished surface, the HOA's grip was ironclad. Rules were rules, and anyone who stepped out of line became a target. The HOA president, Martin Green, was a tall, silver-haired man in his early 60s. To newcomers, Martin seemed reasonable. He smiled at community barbecues, shook hands at board meetings, and often reminded people that rules keep our neighborhood safe. But longtime residents knew the truth. Martin was as strict as Karen, only smoother in his delivery. He had a way of twisting words, turning suggestions into obligations, and quietly pressuring residents into compliance. Karen adored Martin. In her mind, she was his right hand, a soldier enforcing his vision of perfection. She often referred to herself as the eyes of the HOA. But the reality was, Martin mostly tolerated her because she was relentless, and she saved him the trouble of chasing down petty violations. Across the street from Karen lived the Millers, Ryan and Sophie, with their son, Ethan. Ryan was a construction foreman, a man who believed in hard work and weekends filled with backyard projects. Sophie, a schoolteacher, had always dreamed of a peaceful life in Willow Creek, far from the chaos of city living. Together, they wanted to give Ethan the childhood they never had: freedom, creativity, and the joy of building something with his own hands. The treehouse had been Sophie's idea originally. "Let him have an adventure," she'd said one Sunday morning. "Every boy deserves a little world of his own." Ryan agreed, and soon weekends were filled with hammering, painting, and Ethan's squeals of excitement as the structure slowly took shape. Most neighbors approved. Mrs. Linda Hayes, an elderly widow who lived next door, often brought cookies for Ethan and commented on how charming the treehouse looked. "It reminds me of when my boys were young," she'd say, smiling wistfully. Linda represented the quiet majority residents who simply wanted to live in peace, uninterested in HOA politics. But Karen saw things differently. To her, the treehouse wasn't just wood and nails, it was defiance. Each day she walked her dog past the Miller's yard, her eyes narrowed, lips pursed. She snapped photos, scribbled notes in a leather-bound notebook, and sent emails to Martin demanding immediate action. At the next HOA meeting, held in the clubhouse with its fluorescent lights and stale coffee, Karen made her case. She slammed down printed pictures of the treehouse like evidence in a courtroom. "This structure is illegal," she barked, her voice echoing off the walls. Section 14.3 clearly states, "No unapproved structures may be visible from the street." If we let this go, what's next? Junk cars on lawns? Chicken coops? Willow Creek will look like a circus. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few muttered that the treehouse was harmless, just for a child. But Martin cleared his throat, silencing the room. "We must uphold the rules," he said firmly. "However, we will give the Millers formal notice first. A warning letter. They'll have 30 days to remove it before fines are issued." Karen's eyes glittered with triumph. But for Ryan and Sophie, the letter felt like a punch to the gut. 30 days to erase their son's joy. 30 days to destroy something that had become a symbol of family and freedom. Ryan wanted to fight. "It's just a treehouse," he argued. "We'll go to the board, show them it's safe." Sophie worried, though she knew the HOA had a history of bullying families into submission. Ethan, of course, didn't understand. To him, it wasn't a violation, it was his fort. He had painted stars on the inside walls, taped up comic book pages, and invited friends to secret meetings. When his parents tried to explain, he shook his head, tears brimming. "But why? It's mine. Why do they hate it?" The tension spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some supported the Millers quietly, others shrugged and avoided involvement. But one thing was clear, the battle lines were being drawn. And in the middle of it all stood Karen, smiling smugly, convinced that she had already won. What no one realized yet was how far she was willing to go, and how dangerous her obsession would become. The HOA clubhouse was packed that night. Folding chairs scraped against the polished floors, murmurs rippled across the crowd, and the faint smell of burnt coffee filled the air. Word had spread quickly. Neighbors were eager to see what would happen when the Millers confronted the HOA over the treehouse. Ryan sat stiffly in the front row, his jaw set, his fists clenched on his knees. Beside him, Sophie whispered calm encouragement, though her own nerves were frayed. Ethan had stayed home with Mrs. Hayes, who promised to keep him distracted with cookies and board games. This was no place for a child, it was a battlefield. At the head of the long oak table sat HOA President Martin Green, flanked by 5 board members. Karen was not on the board, but she had planted herself in the front row, binder on her lap, eyes darting around the room like a hawk ready to strike. Martin cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, we address a matter of compliance regarding the Miller residence and the unapproved construction of a treehouse. Ryan stood, holding a folder of his own. He had come prepared, determined to defend his family. With all due respect, this isn't just a construction. It's a safe, small treehouse for my son. I've reinforced every joint, ensured stability, and I'm willing to have it inspected. It's not a danger. It's a child's dream. Applause broke out from a handful of neighbors, quickly hushed by Martin raising his hand. Karen shot up from her chair, waving her binder like a weapon. Dream or not, it's against the rules. Section 14.3. If we allow one violation, the neighborhood collapses into chaos. What's next? Sheds, garages, shacks? Ryan turned, his eyes locking on hers. This isn't about rules, Karen. This is about control. You've harassed us since the first nail went into that wood. You don't care about property values, you care about power. The room buzzed with murmurs. Sophie placed a hand on Ryan's arm, trying to steady him, but his voice carried the weight of every frustrated homeowner who had ever felt crushed by the HOA's iron grip. Martin leaned forward. Mr. Miller, I understand your frustration, but the HOA exists to protect the uniformity and integrity of this community. Exceptions cannot be made. Ryan slammed the folder on the table. Photos spilled out images of other violations, sheds behind fences, patios built without approval, even Martin's own backyard gazebo that had no record of authorization. Gasps filled the room. You enforce rules selectively, Ryan accused. You ignore violations when it suits you, but you come after my son's treehouse because Karen doesn't like the view. Martin's face flushed red, but before he could answer, Karen leapt to her feet again. This is slander. The Millers are troublemakers. That treehouse is dangerous, an eyesore. Sophie finally rose, her voice calm but firm. Dangerous? My husband builds homes for a living. He's poured more care into that little structure than most contractors put into real houses. You're not worried about safety, you're obsessed with control. The tension cracked like a lightning bolt. Shouts erupted from the audience, some siding with the Millers, others muttering about rules and fairness. The board struggled to regain order, banging the gavel, calling for silence. Then came the breaking point. Ryan leaned forward, his voice low but searing. If you think I'm tearing down my son's happiness because of your power games, you're wrong. That treehouse stays. The room exploded. Karen screamed about fines, Martin declared sanctions, and neighbors argued with each other. A board member announced that daily fines would begin immediately $2.50 per day until the treehouse was removed. Ryan's chest tightened. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just about the treehouse anymore, it was about dignity, family, and the right to live without being crushed by the tyranny of rules. As they walked out of the meeting, the crowd still shouting behind them, Ryan muttered, "They want a war? They've got one." But no one could have predicted how quickly that war would spiral into something far darker, something criminal. The days after the heated HOA meeting were tense in Willow Creek. Neighbors whispered across driveways, glancing nervously at the Miller house. Every morning, Ryan found a new violation notice tucked under his doormat, trash bin visible, lawn too tall by half an inch, car parked an inch over the driveway line. It was clear, the HOA had declared war. The fines piled up quickly. First $250 a day for the treehouse. Then another $500 for yard disorder. Within a week, the Millers were staring down nearly $5,000 in penalties. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out, her hands trembling. Ryan, they're bleeding us dry. We can't keep up. Ryan's jaw tightened. That's their plan, to break us until we give in. But I won't. The breaking point came one evening when Ethan invited a friend over to play. The boys scrambled up into the treehouse, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. Ryan watched from the porch, a rare smile tugging at his tired face. But then he saw Karen standing at the edge of the yard, phone out, recording every second. "Karen!" Ryan shouted, storming toward her. "Stay off my property." Karen smirked. "I'm gathering evidence. That structure is illegal, and when it collapses, everyone will know I warned you." Ryan's fists curled, but Sophie pulled him back. "She wants you to snap. Don't give her the satisfaction." Later that night, the situation escalated beyond anything they expected. Two sheriff's deputies knocked on the Miller's door. Their flashing lights painted the street in red and blue. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as rumors spread like wildfire. "Mr. Miller," one deputy said, "we've had a report of a dangerous structure on your property. A child was seen climbing it earlier. We're required to investigate." Ryan's face went pale. "This is harassment. It's safe. I built it myself." The deputies inspected the treehouse, shining flashlights along the beams and joints. One nodded approvingly. "It looks solid, better than most backyard playsets. But, we have to file a report. HOA rules don't supersede safety concerns." Ryan realized immediately who had called them. Across the street, Karen stood with her arms crossed, lips curled into a satisfied smile. The next morning, the HOA delivered another notice, fines doubled. Now $500 per day for non-compliance. At this rate, the Millers risked foreclosure within months. Sophie broke down at the kitchen table. "Ryan, they're going to take our home. We can't fight City Hall and Karen at the same time." Ryan placed a hand over hers. "Then we take this to court. If they want to fight, we'll fight where it counts." But what neither of them knew was that Karen's vendetta wasn't just about rules. Mrs. Hayes, the elderly neighbor, revealed the secret one afternoon. She shuffled to Sophie's porch with a folder of old documents. "I probably shouldn't say this, dear, but you deserve to know. Karen lost a court case against your husband's company years ago. He turned down her renovation project because she wanted it done for half price. She never forgave him. She's been waiting for a chance to get even." Sophie's stomach dropped. "So this isn't about Ethan's treehouse at all?" Mrs. Hayes nodded grimly. "It's about revenge." The realization hit like a thunderclap. Karen wasn't protecting the neighborhood, she was settling a personal score. And she was willing to use the HOA as her weapon. But Karen was about to make her biggest, most dangerous move yet, one that would turn her obsession from petty harassment into something criminal. The Millers had begun preparing for a legal battle. Ryan gathered documents, Sophie drafted letters, and even some sympathetic neighbors offered to testify on their behalf. For a few days, it seemed like hope might finally break through the storm. But Karen wasn't finished. On a humid Friday night, the neighborhood was quiet. Porch lights glowed faintly, crickets sang in the distance, and Ethan begged his parents for a special request: "Can I sleep in the treehouse tonight? Just one night before they make us take it down." Ryan hesitated. "It's too dangerous right now, buddy." But Sophie, seeing the sadness in her son's eyes, touched her husband's arm. "He'll be fine. We'll keep an ear out." Ethan climbed into the treehouse with his sleeping bag and flashlight, whispering excitedly to his stuffed bear about their fort under the stars. To him, it was magic, one last adventure before the dream ended. Across the street, Karen watched from her window. Her chest burned with fury. She had warned them. She had reported them. She had demanded compliance. And yet, the Millers defied her, openly mocking the rules she held sacred. "This ends tonight," she muttered, slipping on her gardening gloves. At 1 a.m., she crept across the lawn, a cordless saw hidden beneath her sweater. The glow from her flashlight sliced through the dark as she approached the treehouse like a predator. She pressed the blade against the wooden support beam and pulled the trigger. The saw roared. The wood groaned, splintered. Inside, Ethan stirred, confused. He poked his head out of the small window just as the beam cracked like thunder. "Dad," he whispered, fear rising in his chest. The entire structure tilted violently. Ethan screamed. Ryan and Sophie bolted upright in bed. Ryan dashed outside barefoot, Sophie close behind. The sound of snapping wood filled the air, followed by the horrifying crash as the treehouse gave way. Ethan tumbled down with it, hitting the ground with a cry of pain. His arm twisted unnaturally beneath him, blood streaming from a cut across his forehead. Ryan dropped to his knees, scooping his son into his arms. "Ethan! Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me." And there, just a few feet away, stood Karen, still clutching the saw, her face pale but defiant. "This wouldn't have happened if you'd listened," she hissed. The sight was surreal, a grown woman, weapon in hand, standing over an injured child. Neighbors burst out of their homes, rushing across lawns. Someone shouted, "Call 911." Another yelled, "She's lost her mind." Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed across Willow Creek. Deputies swarmed the scene, EMTs rushing to stabilize Ethan. Ryan cradled his son, refusing to let go until the paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher. Sophie sobbed uncontrollably, clutching Ethan's stuffed bear. Deputy Alvarez, a no-nonsense officer with 20 years on the force, turned to Karen. "Ma'am, put the saw down. Now." Karen shook her head wildly. "I was protecting the neighborhood. That structure was dangerous. I was doing my duty." "Your duty?" Alvarez snapped. "You just committed felony assault on a child." Karen's eyes went wide. For the first time, her bravado cracked. She dropped the saw, hands trembling, as deputies pulled her arms behind her back and snapped on the cuffs. The crowd of neighbors gasped, some whispering, others openly cheering. Ryan, still stained with his son's blood, glared at her as she was led to the patrol car. "You call yourself the protector of this neighborhood? You're nothing but a criminal." Karen tried to protest, but the sound of the patrol car door slamming shut drowned out her words. In the days that followed, Willow Creek changed forever. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from Karen, claiming she acted alone. Martin Green resigned quietly, his reputation shattered by accusations of selective enforcement. Neighbors who once stayed silent began pushing for reform, determined never again to let petty power crush families. As for the Millers, Ethan recovered slowly, his arm in a cast but his spirit unbroken. His parents promised him a new treehouse, this time in a safer place, far from the reach of HOA politics. The scars would remain, but so would the lesson: when power goes unchecked, even the smallest battles can turn into tragedies.